everybody. Welcome to the Eat, Pray, Faith podcast with Tracey. That is me. And with me today is an incredible guest, Dr. Jack Wolfson, who I remember from years ago. I friended you on Facebook after your book came out, which was such an exciting time. And I really feel you revolutionized a particular genre of medicine at that time and made some big waves. So it is an absolute honor to have you on my podcast today. But ironically, we're going to be talking about a whole different topic. We're going to be talking about mold, mycotoxins, and the impact on the immune system and how those things can actually create dis-ease in the body. So, Dr. Wolfson, thank you for being here. It is such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on. And, listen, I'm a cardiologist by training, but as you know, you start getting into root cause of why people get sick. And when you fix the root cause, you wind up helping people with a lot of other health issues. My career was taking off and things were going really well, but unfortunately for my father, not so much. He was in his late 50s and he was depressed. He lost a lot of his zest for life. We tried him on different pharmaceuticals. He wasn't getting better. And ultimately, we take him to the Mayo Clinic. And at the Mayo Clinic, they diagnose him with progressive supranuclear palsy, a Parkinson's-like illness. And they said he has 3 years on average to live. We have no treatment for him. And when I asked the head of neurology at the Mayo Clinic what caused this, he said he didn't know, that there was no known cause of this. And then simultaneously, serendipitously, God introduced me to this young woman who is a chiropractor. And she told me all the reasons why my father was sick and dying. And of course, those are things, the food, the lifestyle, the mindset of what a person has. And ultimately, that would awaken my eyes to what really leads people to be sick. It would awaken my eyes to me becoming healthy. And ultimately, it's funny, Tracey, she said to me, you need to become a DC. And I said, what? I said, you want me to become a DC, a doctor of chiropractic? I've spent all these years training to become a cardiologist, and I got this big job here and everything's going really well. And, you want me to become a chiropractor? And she said, no, not DC doctor of chiropractic, become a DC doctor of cause. And that's exactly what I did.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you on this side of the knowledge because you've brought such, I would say, innovation to the industry with all of your forethinking. And, although it's not common practice, it's needed. And so I know you're a cardiologist by trade, but you've become just an overall wealth of knowledge in health, wellness, and functional and integrative care. So it's why we decided to talk about mold and mycotoxins today. It's all relative. Everything sources back to metabolic, even cardiovascular disease is metabolic. So when we don't have the right metabolic processes, we're going to end up sick in some way. So how did you get into your interest of mold? Was it a personal experience? Or are you just seeing more of it in your practice? Where did this interest come from?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting journey of how we got here. And I do consider myself one of the world's foremost preventive cardiologists, doctor of cause. And it's also, but we do stand on the shoulders of giants, we all do. And there were other integrative cardiologists before me. Stephen Sinatra is probably the most famous integrative cardiologist and really paved the way for a lot of maybe the next generation of what we are. And I think there's this learning process that we all go through as far as what causes people to have heart disease, heart attacks and strokes or anything else. What causes that? And I think we talk a lot about the food and we all debate the food story. And then we say, listen, sunshine and sleep are important. But then as we go along, we hear about all these different toxins that play a role. And I think that this toxins category, we're learning so much more about. And certainly all the man-made toxins, the plastics, the phthalates, the parabens, the pesticides, all those things are really, really, really bad. But this biblical knowledge of mold and what they talked about in the Old Testament, in the book of Leviticus, about how mold leads to health problems, that just shows you, again, this is this kind of ancient problem that is only that much worse today. Now, how did I up my knowledge on this? We were living in a house in Arizona in 2018. You think Arizona's dry and there's not going to be water damage. Well, any house that has running water can have mold. And if you have humidity and if you have an HVAC system, if you have anything where you're running the air conditioning and things like that, again, you can develop mold. And we were living in a house and my wife was not feeling well. And each one of the family members who were living in that house were not feeling well. And then ultimately it takes us to my wife is sitting at the kitchen table. She's trying to breastfeed our third child and having a lot of difficulty doing that. Not producing a lot of milk, baby didn't have a good latch, all those kind of things. And so she's holding the baby with one hand, breast pump with the other, while our nanny is holding a glutathione nebulizer to my wife's mouth. And it's at that moment when my wife looked at the area under the kitchen sink and saw a stream of water coming from under there. She put our baby daughter down. She went to go look under the sink and saw that there was obvious water damage. And upon further inspection by professionals, that there was mold that was growing under the sink. She never went back into that house. She called me that afternoon as soon as it happened and said, "Hey, we have mold. It's why we're all sick. I'm going down to stay at my sister's house with the baby. I want you to pick up the two boys who were at a friend's house. And if you want to join us, you're welcome to come down to my sister's house," which of course would likely have mold as well. But we didn't really know much at that time. And I said, of course, I love you. And I'm coming down to that house. And that was the journey of mold. That's how it all started personally for us.
Well, thank goodness for your sister-in-law, right? She had the open room for you guys to come in and stay. But that's amazing, and I don't think people really realize the impact of mold. So, and it can be detrimental for many people. I mean, I have had clients that live in their car because they can't find a place. They've come to a point where they're so extremely sensitive to it that it's almost like mast cell activation for them. And that's where it all leads. So let's talk about, maybe you can give us some enlightenment on the types of mold that can be in a household, and then the difference between mold and mycotoxin, because I hear those words used interchangeably and they're very different. So can you give us a little bit high level? What kinds of molds have you seen be the most detrimental to health? And then we can talk about mycotoxins and the impact of those.
Yes. So what happens is that when water from an obvious leak or even humidity changes or condensation, when that gets on material, it allows for mold growth. Now, it's not anything that's nefarious by mold. Mold is there to break down decayed organic matter. It's to recycle. It's a recycling system. So when there's mold on a dead piece of wood in the forest, it's there to break it all down. It's just the perfect creation of how the system all works. So if you're living in a house with mold, the mold wants to break down, it wants to eat and it wants to live in and of itself. And it also needs to defend itself. So the mold releases these toxins that are called mycotoxins. And myco meaning, being Greek for mold. So these mycotoxins. Now, a lot of times, Tracey, you know this, like doctors will kind of roll their eyes at this and they'll say mold, schmold. I mean, there's no such thing as these mold mycotoxins. And then you explain this. The most famous mold mycotoxin of all time is a toxin that is released from a certain mold that kills bacteria. Because that's what mold wants to do. It wants to kill other molds and kill other bacteria in this fight for territory. So the mold releases this toxin that kills bacteria. And in many cases, there's many examples of this. But what's the most famous? It's something you may have heard of. It's a mold toxin that kills bacteria. It's called penicillin. Everybody knows what penicillin does. It kills bacteria, but it's a mold mycotoxin. And Fleming discovered that over 100 years ago, yet most medical doctors will not make this correlation. So what if you're living in a home that has penicillium mold that's releasing this mold mycotoxin penicillin? What if you're living in a house of penicillin? What do you think that constant exposure to penicillin does to your gut microbiome?
Right.
Do you think that kills good bacteria in your gut? Do you think that causes changes to the bacteria in your gut? And then what about all the other molds that have other toxins? What do you think that does to your gut microbiome? The answer is it damages it. So now you have a damaged gut microbiome, and that leads to intestinal hyperpermeability, often called leaky guts, because the good bacteria are very protective. The good bacteria help to make enzymes. They make us more readily available to break down our food, absorb our food, create vitamins, from that, turn vitamin K1 into K2, for example. So all these different things that the gut microbiome does. And you mentioned earlier about immunity and the immune function of that. So everyone knows about the importance of the gut microbiome. And it is these toxins, this toxic onslaught from all places that destroy the gut microbiome. But in particular, at this moment, I guess we're talking about mold, growing in the home, bacteria in the home. And then ultimately, once you have leaky gut, now you've got inflammation, oxidative stress, immune system activation that leads to autonomic dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction, leaky blood vessels. Now you get oxidized LDL particles getting into the intima and the media of a blood vessel, monocyte, immune system recruitment, foam cells, cell death, apoptosis, the creation of a soft plaque that will rupture, and then you have a heart attack and die. That's the sequence of it. And again, the number of cardiologists who understand this, because we are not trained in this, as you know,
Right.
is very low.
And most healthcare professionals in general are not trained in that whole pathway you just explained. I mean, that's kind of like this epiphany, right? As you look at these, small particles and whatnot with people, it's another consideration for every integrative care professional listening to be like, maybe we should be looking at mold. So just to clarify and summarize what you said, which was amazing, we have mycotoxins. These are toxic chemical compounds. They're created by certain mold fungi, and these compounds can contaminate the air. They're usually from water damaged buildings, not necessarily all the time, but that's the most common source. But they're also in food too, things like grains, nuts, coffee, dried fruit. So they're highly toxic, even in very small amounts. And it is something we need to have to consider in medicine moving forward. Now, I don't know if the allopathic's going to do that, so I think it's up to us, Dr. Wolfson. So have you seen many people with mold exposure in your practice lately? And I feel it's really kind of on the forefront now. I didn't hear about this 10 years ago. What do you think's happening?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I didn't hear about it really, Tim. I think we heard about it, but we didn't realize the gravitas of the situation. Yet when you test people's urine for mold mycotoxins, which I highly recommend, everybody's showing up with stuff. And yet the literature is very young. So it's a question of what mold mycotoxins are coming from food and what's from the environment. I think there's a lot of overlap between what we thought was all food-based. It's actually indoor airspace. And I think we have to really test our environment first, then automatically say, oh, well, it's coming from the dried fruit, or it's coming from fermented foods, like all the things you and I have been taught for years about all the different benefits of fermented foods. Yet why do a lot of people with MCAS, why do a lot of people with maybe, the SIBO, why do they struggle with fermented foods? And ultimately, I think it's still, we got to look at the building structures, and you cannot assume that just because your house is brand new. I've lived in brand new homes with mold. I've lived in because the homes are constructed out of wood. They are constructed in the outdoors. The building materials may arrive to the job site moldy. Nobody cares. There is, of course, rain, the elements, the snow that goes into this. I mean, it's really a scary process. And why are most people, medical doctors and government officials and insurance companies, can you imagine if we have to remediate 300 million homes in the United States?
Right. Nobody wants to talk about this.
Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that. So let's not talk about it on a global level. We can only talk about it to the individual on this conversation. To wrap that up, I mean, if you are sick, you have to check for mold. And then if you do I recommend what's called the number 8 Swiffer test from a company called Envirobiomics. And any practitioner can carry that on their website when they get into an agreement or have where you can refer people to the Biometrics website and stuff like that. The short of it is it's a Swiffer test. So the person collects dust samples of their home, and then they send it into the company. Now, the number 8 tests for mold mycotoxins and the bacteria. And I've seen many situations, including one where I lived in, where the house didn't have any mold. It was bacteria. It was water damaged bacteria. And the bacteria secrete these various elements, one of which most people are familiar with, called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. And the lipopolysaccharides from the gram-negative cell walls of the bacteria, they do the damage to the gut microbiome. They lead to leaky gut, intestinal hyperpermeability, and all bets are off. And it's I'm not aware of any. You can test for lipopolysaccharides, antibodies to lipopolysaccharides. You can test for those things. It's not the only place they come from, but it is a major offender that people, they need to check their house first.
They overlook it. Yeah, I was introduced to a test called the dust test. So same thing. And lucky for me, I'm not a great housekeeper, so I could go test all that dust. And it's just basically what has settled out of the environment onto your furniture, and you test the most livable areas, right? So your living room and the things that you would think. The owner of that company said that there's more mold in newer houses now because they're so tightly sealed. There's no ventilation, there's no air circulation. In the older houses, you're getting that. If you're in an older house like I am, you can feel the draft coming down the stairs. And no matter the new windows and everything else that we've put in, doesn't matter. Somewhere that wind is coming from. But actually, after speaking to him, I felt pretty good about it because I was like, oh, we have ventilation through our house. And he said, that's why all of these older houses, some of them can have mold. He said, but not all of them do. He said, in the houses that he's testing, it's the majority of the new houses that have the biggest mold. And I'll tell you, that's a hard thing to tell people. I will tell my clients over and over again, I think you need to get your house tested for mold. And they're like, well, it's a brand new house. And I'm like, I know, but that doesn't mean anything. You have the same wood that's sitting in warehouses for months. And now they're going to build your house and tightly seal it so there's no ventilation. What do you think is going to happen? So that's such a great point that you brought up.
Well, let me say, it's all we can do is offer the people the information. What they want to do with it is up to them, and however they want to rationalize it, would be up to them whether or not they want to test. Now, back to what you said about the breathability of the homes. That being said, 3,500 years ago, when Moses is talking about this, homes were extremely breathable, yet they recognized the ramifications of that. So I'm not going to let anybody off the hook because they have an older home and it may be more breathable. And then, two things. Number one, if you're sick, you have to check for mold. And number two, if you have these abnormal blood markers, I think you need to check for mold as well. So if you're like, I'm 54 years old, I feel amazing, I don't have any aches and pains or gut aches, and my blood pressure is good, like everything is good. And then you run the testing on these people and you see inflammation, you see oxidative stress, you look at kind of what's smoldering here, you look under the hood and you see that there's a problem, then you're going to be proactive and say, I know you feel good, I know you look good, but your numbers are concerning. And what is the cause of the inflammation? What is the cause of the oxidative stress? And one of those major factors could be living in a home that has water damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mean I didn't test my house. I did. So I still felt good about the breeze. I was like, well, that's okay then, So all of these years later, this little house, still is okay, probably because nobody ever replaced the windows. So that was great. Now that I did, now I'm worried. So now I'm keeping it less.
You're talking about this, Tracey, that it's so easy to tell someone, okay, eat this food, avoid this food, get more sunshine, get more sleep, get more, exercise and physical activity, make sure you pray every day. Focus on good. All those things are good and they're amazing and they're helpful and they're relatively easy to do. But how do you tell someone to test their home, attempt to remediate their home or move? And then, like you mentioned about my sister-in-law's house who has mold and bacteria as well, where do you go? And how many people are going to be willing to go to the next step? Like you and I talked about before we were recording, we've been on a 4-month journey, just living in tents, like living like Bedouins, going from place to place. How many people are going to live in tents? And then another thing, Tracey, you'll love this as well. How many clients have you seen where you're talking to the husband and wife, and the wife has all these health problems? She's struggling, and you're giving her, these solutions and things that you think are going to be helpful. And she's struggling. Now she's sitting next to her husband, and he feels fine, right? He feels okay. Now, I mean, he may have high blood pressure. He's on blood pressure drugs, cholesterol drugs. He's got erectile dysfunction. He pops Viagra all the time. He feels he needs to. Like but he's fine.
Feels all right.
He's sitting there, right, Tracey? He's got his arms up, and his arms are crossed and folded over, and he's looking at you all skeptical. And he's like, I'm not paying I'm testing my house, remediate my house, throw out my stuff, change my car because the HVAC system there is all, contaminated. I'm not living in a tent. I mean, this is what people are up against. Now, there are plenty of men who suffer, and you know that as well. And you've seen them certainly like I have. But the women are this canary in the coal mine where, and it's such a big, massive topic. But that being said, we have to continue to address it like we do,
Right. And at least take some steps, test your house. You can make decisions later, which are big decisions. We talked, I've had clients living in their cars and, they can't find any space because they've become so sensitive to not only mold now, but everything. Now, everything they eat flares them. Anything it touches their skin flares them. They've become major MCAS, right? Which is mast cell activation syndrome, which for the listeners, those are different types of immune system cells that live in connective tissue. So they're different than your white and red blood cells. These are connective tissue immune cells, and they can become very angry, and they're very hard to shut off once you turn them on. And I really think we're seeing so much MCAS, obviously, with all the toxicity we've poured into our lives, in our food, injected into ourselves voluntarily. And then we add on this mold exposure. And I just want your thoughts on this theory. Do you think that all of the EMF that we are experiencing right now is amplifying any of these mold spores or bacterias?
Yeah, most certainly. We're not living in the same environment as Moses did. We are living in a situation where the EMF now is infinite. We are living in a situation now where all these other building materials, all the off-gassing, all the VOCs, we're living in a time, again, of bad food, of pesticides, of everything. I mean, again, just thousands and thousands of other factors that are impacting our health in general. And then how does the mold and the bacteria behave in that as well? And do they sense more danger, and therefore do they increase their release of the toxins as well? The mold, because we talk about all these other toxins. We could talk about, mercury that's injected into people. We could talk about lead in paint. We could talk about carbon monoxide and radon. We could talk about plastics and phthalates and parabens and all these other things, right? But these are not living entities. Mold is living. Bacteria is living, and it wants to survive. I'm not trying to make it, anthropomorphize. Like, I'm not trying to make it into a human, like it's got thoughts, but according to the evolutionary version or to the biblical version, the mold was here first, and then man and woman was introduced into the story. So it's got really good survival skills. And again, it is extremely deleterious. But to your point, I think that if people minimize all these other things, they can certainly improve. But I think that the mold in and of itself, and the toxins released by the mold, and mold also has VOCs and stuff. I remember, growing up, and you went to your grandmother's house, and you remember that, mildewy smell, the musty smell. What do you think?
Basement. That's exactly what comes to mind. The smell of my grandma's basement. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Must. I mean, what is the musty smell? What is it coming from? Grandma wasn't going around with like, a certain spray that said like must spray on it.
Grandma house spray. That's what it was. That's what I thought it was, you know. It smelled like saltines, toast, and mold. That's basically what her house smelled like. And sometimes dogs, but we didn't think about it back then.
Tracey, we were down in Costa Rica and we were looking at this house to rent. And again, just spectacular location, beautiful views, the whole thing. And my wife and I walked into the house. My wife lasted about 15 seconds before she walked out. But I'm in there and I'm talking to the agent. I'm like, when's the last time someone's been in this house? And he's like, I don't know, maybe we haven't rented it out in a while. It was the different season. It was the rainy season. So probably like no one's been in here for about 2.5 months. And I said, it smells like curry, like someone has been cooking using curry in here. And he's like, I get the smell too, but no one's been in here. So it's the mold and the bacteria of the home. They released these VOCs, and in this case, it smelled to me exactly like curry. Uh, and I don't know. It's just scary stuff. And maybe just let me get this point out there, real quick, Tracey, again, where people are like, oh, well, it's the cholesterol problem, abnormal cholesterol. Cholesterol abnormalities are from many different things. But one issue is if you have these various toxins, of thousands of them, now it's going to lead to hepatic or liver overload, hepatic dysfunction. And then once you have hepatic dysfunction, you no longer, for example, have LDL receptors, those catcher's mitts on the liver that pull out old LDL particles. So now these particles keep circulating around. They become small, dense, oxidized LDL particles, and they are avidly and readily taken up by the vascular system through these leaky blood vessels. So that's one thing there. When we look at, and it is known, it is in the medical literature. It's not a lot of data that shows us this because it's not well studied, but again, how the LDL receptor is impacted by these mycotoxins.
Mhm. Absolutely. And, I always tell people anything can cause anything, and we need to roll out everything. And, I was telling you before, I work a lot with people that have cancer. And mycotoxin testing is one of the tests that we will do. They're hands down. We're going to do it because there is direct correlation and studies on different types of mold that can elicit a cancer-like response in cells. And I was thinking of a book earlier when we were talking about the EMF impact. Have you ever read the book? What is it called? It's called The Invisible Rainbow. And it was basically the author wrote it about the development of electrical technology, and it correlates with this emergence of chronic disease through history. It's things like the Spanish flu and the onset of the radio. And so he correlates all this timeline with these electromagnetic frequencies leading up to, and now it's a little bit older, so he's probably not into the 5G, but he is saying we've never studied anything really over about 25 megahertz, which is about a microwave, maybe a little bit more with some medical equipment now with MRIs and things like that. But what is 5G? What is the level? What is the impact? I mean, we know from that book and from other studies that just a 25 megahertz EMF frequency will increase the excitatory response of different funguses like candida and bacterias. I mean, just imagine what it's doing now to all of the mold that's within the house. So we have to consider it, right? Because just because we can't see it doesn't make it a real thing. It's like gravity. I'm stuck to the earth for a reason. And I can't see gravity, but I know that it's doing its job for me. So I believe in it.
Well, let me, you mentioned The Invisible Rainbow, and that is a phenomenal book for anyone who wants to do a deep dive into the history of man-made electromagnetic fields, man-made energy, and its health impact on not only humans, but also animal species, because he gets a lot of that from the study of animals and birds. And ultimately, really just as simplistic of what does it mean to be exposed to all the Wi-Fi, all the satellites, all the cell phones, all the technologies, television, waves, radio waves, power lines. Like, what does all that mean to our electrical being? We are all electrical. That is not woo-woo or, anything like that. It is quite obvious when we check the electrical system of the heart through an EKG. We're seeing the electricity of the heart, EEG of the brain, EMG of the neuromuscular interface. So it is very easy to understand that there may be a potential problem between man-made electromagnetic fields and the human physiology, and therefore cause of disease. And Furstenberg lays it out very eloquently that every time that there is a virus or there is mass sickness, that there is a release of some new technology, whether it is power lines in the 1870s or radar or radio waves, television communications, and then kind of going through the latest up into 5G. And where Furstenberg right now is really rallying against is the electrification of the skies, where every moment of every day they are launching satellites up into the sky. And it may allow for you and I to have these conversations where you're at home and I'm in the middle of nowhere, Central Texas, being able to communicate like we're standing right next to each other, and there's different value in that. But please understand the health ramifications of that. And now, for people who don't understand this, I'm going to go full conspiratorial here, because there are people who believe there are no such things as viruses, that there was no such thing as the COVID virus, that the COVID virus that they called it was the release of 5G and or other electromagnetic technologies that we were not made aware of, that led to this global sickness, if you will. And even again, I mean, like, how much of that really is propaganda versus not? The point being is that we need to continue to question everything and not believe necessarily what we're hearing from CNN or Fox, not believe necessarily what we're hearing from our medical doctor, unfortunately. And ultimately, he lays out the case that when you release this new technology, it leads to a sickness. And then you get into the evidence of what really is the proof of virus. What is a virus? What is this external thing versus this material that is made by the human called exosomes, where we release these DNA and RNA molecules. We manufacture these and we release them on our own. And then what leads two people to get sick into a house? Like, the story, right? Well, I came down with the flu, and then my spouse had the flu. Well, does that mean I passed some virus onto that person, or did I release these exosomes that cause changes in the symptomatology and physiology of my spouse? There is data that shows that if you put bacteria in water, okay, and you put a impermeable barrier in between, yet you add toxins into one side, the other side becomes sick. But there's nothing that's passed in between. The only thing that's passed in between is energy, is infrared and other frequencies emitted by one sick entity impacting another. And there is literature on that as well. And it's very interesting, to consider. And yeah, what else can I tell you? That's the story.
Well, I think, if we don't believe that, everybody listening to this podcast right now probably has somebody, when they get around them, they're just like, ew, right? I mean, you can tell right off the bat walking into a party, you can feel the vibe in there.
Bad vibes. What are the vibes, right? What are the vibes? And if you think about us as, the most intelligent being ever created by God in the image of God, wouldn't we have that detectability? Wouldn't we have that kind of
discernment? is what it's.
I mean, discernment, the sense, this sixth sense, seventh sense, to be able to get this kind of energy, this maybe, I guess, maybe in some ways, evil energies, satanic energies. Not to say that every time we see someone that we don't vibe with,
We're like, oh, you
that,
have the flu. We know what you're practicing. No, we're just kidding.
yeah, well, I mean, it's but it's just, why do people, come down with sickness? And invariably, I think a lot of people get sick when they get into a moldy environment, a bacterial environment, because what happens is that, and they may think that it's the flu, they may think that it's a virus, but it never was. You were exposed to some toxin, and it may be EMF, it may have been radon, it may have been carbon monoxide, it may have been bacteria. Again, flying on a plane, for example, and what kind of chemicals are they putting inside the plane? Oh, I got to my destination, and for like the first 36 hours, I felt like I had the flu. Somebody on the plane gave me something. No, I mean, they didn't give you any virus. So it's very interesting. And it's something that, again, in a world of all possibilities, to understand, these are things you got to look at. And that's why, again, these shots. And the question is, if the shots are effective in certain scenarios, if, for example, the COVID shot decreased the morbidity and mortality of people getting COVID or dying from COVID, morbidity and mortality from COVID, how was it effective? Like, I mean, again, what was it doing? And was it immunosuppressant? Was it something like, again, where it just shut down the person's immune system? Because it is not the toxin that leads us to have the symptom. It's our body's response to the toxin that leads us to have the symptoms. If we have snot pouring down our nose, it's not snot full of virus. It's all of our immune cells that's there. So it is all of this response. And if you give someone a steroid, they're not going to have that response. If you shut down their immune system with these toxins, they're not going to have the response. If you shut down the immune system with a unproven injection, then they may not mount a response. And you may say, well, it's a good thing because I didn't want to die of COVID. I will say that it was not a good thing, certainly not in the long term. And I think as time goes on, doctors who taught people otherwise are really being vindicated.
Yeah. And suppressing the immune system in any way, the long-term effect of that is not good. That's like suppressing appetite for a very long time. You might lose weight in the interim, but you're going to die of starvation eventually. So it's the same concept. But I love this whole conversation. As we wrap it up, I just wanted to ask a few more questions. When it comes to mold and mycotoxins, what are some symptoms that you could give our listeners to look for? And I know you're kind of like, hey, if you're sick, get tested. I agree with that, but not everybody's going to do it. How about some specifics? What are we looking for mold exposure so that people get the buy-in?
You're right. There are so many things, and it really can impact everything, as you know. Brain fog would be one. Cognitive, disorders, brain fog, memory issues. That's a big one. Skin issues as well. Eczema, rashes, dermatitis, big one. Gastrointestinal issues. We talked about how it impacts the gut microbiome, and boom, there you go. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain, malabsorptions, all those kind of things. Children, it's extremely important to check your home if you have children in the house, if you have pets in the house, because they're all impacted. So again, those are all major factors. From a cardiovascular standpoint, yeah, right, all of it is critical. We always have to continue on the search, peel back the onion, if you will, looking for causation of why people get sick. But you can imagine that a lot of people would listen to these conversations, right, Tracey? You, myself, all of the other practitioners who are listening, and we kind of give out all this information. You got to eat this food, avoid this food. You got to live this way, avoid living this way. Think this way, and avoid this. And when people hear that, they're like, I'm just going to go to my cardiologist over here, and all he recommended was a statin drug. So I'm just going to go down that approach. I'm not going to pay you all this money. I'm not going to switch to all organic. I'm not going to move my house. I'm not going to get air purifiers. I'm not going to do these tests and take all these supplements. I'm just going to do that. The problem is the people who follow the medical doctor's advice are going to die. They're going to die. And when they follow our plan, that is the strategy to live. That's the 100-year heart plan. That's the eternal heart plan. That's the longevity plan. The life expectancy of the average American is 77 years of age. A little less for the men, a little more for the women. 77. That is horrific. And if you want to be in the mainstream medical model, that's what you can expect. The age of 77, the last 10 to 15 years of your life will be sick, in and out of doctor's visits, on pharmaceuticals. If you embrace the longevity strategy, the wellness strategy, that is the only way. And it is more difficult than taking the statin drug. I would agree with that. But that plan's not going to work. Our plan does.
Yeah. Amen. And the Bible does say we can live 120 years. So I'm going for it. I want to get there. My grandmother was 99 when she passed away and had only been on pharmaceuticals the last 2 years of her life. And I think that is what brought her to her end. She had never eaten processed foods. She always cooked. When she started to get, and this is nothing against Meals on Wheels, I know they service a lot of people, but that's what she started to receive. And her health declined. The very first thing she had was stomach issues. And then they put her on a PPI, and then it led to another one, then blood pressure. And it was like within 2 years, she was on like 8 medications and she passed away. So, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny had said one time, symptom-free in the presence of pharmaceuticals is not health. It's just repression. And that has always stuck with me. And I think what you are saying and what I'm hearing today is invest in your health, because eventually it will become an expense. And we could get into the insurance thing. We're not even going to talk about that today, but put the money aside for your health budget. It's no different than your groceries. You have to invest in your health. And actually your grocery list is part of your health budget, hands down.
Well, let me expand on what Sherry said and kind of give you my version of that. And I love Sherry Tenpenny, by the way. And when I was in trouble in 2015, when I was on CNN talking about the measles vaccine propaganda and stuff like that, and the violation of our human rights, Sherry was one of the first people to reach out to me and offer support, because she's been in the battle for a long time. But my intention, regarding what you said about the pill for every ill, if you have high blood pressure, and you take a pharmaceutical for the blood pressure, and now your blood pressure is normal, you are at markedly higher risk for heart attack, stroke, and dying compared to the person with normal blood pressure not on pharmaceuticals. That applies to the diabetes world, and that applies in other places as well, where you're symptom-free with rheumatoid arthritis because you take 5 different pharmaceuticals to shut down your immune system. In the specific case of high blood pressure drugs, I will tell anybody and everybody, if you're on a blood pressure drug or drugs, you better be on a plan to get off of those, or you are in trouble. And the literature supports that. 2019 Journal of Hypertension, sponsored by the American Heart Association, they published it. The people at the highest risk were people with their hypertensive, on pharmaceuticals and controlled. They were actually at higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying than the people with high blood pressure on pharmaceuticals, but the blood pressure was still high. So the people with controlled blood pressure on pharma were at the highest risk. And again, statin drugs are notorious. They can beat down your lipid numbers, and then you're going to die. On and on and on. There's so many examples. And let me, if I may, Tracey, say one more thing. I want to get this out there. And I love to do this with patients as well. You close your eyes, and I want you to say, my genetics are perfect. I am built in the image of God, and my genes and my DNA and my genetics are perfect. I can run and jump and see and feel. And as a human, we can make babies. We can do some pretty spectacular things. I do not have a genetic problem. I have an epigenetic problem. All of the environmental toxins, all of the unhealthy lifestyle practices overlay on our genetics, and then we get sick. One family may develop heart disease, one family may develop cancer, one family may develop brain disease, one family may develop all of those, but we're not going to blame it on our genetics. We can say family history because we eat, live, and think like our family members did, therefore we suffer from the same illnesses, but do not blame your genetics.
Yep, that's awesome. I always tell my clients, if genetics is true, then Eve was one sick chick, and I don't think she was. So
well said. Well said.
How we've been so indoctrinated to believe And also your other point about we need some sort of component to create infection in the body where our body can become infected due to necrotic tissue because it's dying and it's wasting. And so it's just a mindset shift that we all have to get used to, that everything matters when we're talking about eat right, think right, move right, poop right, pray right. All of those things, they matter. Lifestyle matters. So thank you so much for sharing everything with us. I know we talked about mold, we talked about so much. So I'd love to have you back sometime. Wishing you well with your family as you go back to the roots in the tent. I think it sounds wonderful. I hope you enjoy it. And do you want to leave our audience with any parting words?
No, most certainly. I think that, listen, heart disease can be prevented. And the best way is not going to be with pharmaceuticals. So, again, work with your healthcare, practitioner, your natural practitioner. I spent 16 years on the wrong side. God put me there. I had experiences there that made me the person I am today. My father's death and demise from this illness was done, and it was premeditated and planned by God in order to create me and my ability to deliver the kind of message that I need to continue to deliver to get the truth out there. And maybe another shout on that is that there's a lot of people who are against our message, right? They're against the things that we say. And this just inspires us more and more to continue to fight. And maybe to expand on that thought a little bit, right? Throughout the history of the world, a lot of people have died defending their religion. People have died defending their country and their political values. And I'm not really saying I'm ready to check out from this life into the eternal life, but anytime soon. But that being said, now is the time we got to take a stand, because if we don't take a stand, no one's going to take a stand in the future for us. So the time is now.
That's right. This is the hill we die on, right? So, well, thank you again, Dr. Wolfson. Such a pleasure always. And everybody, please give him a follow. He has a group called the Natural Health Doctor. You can also just follow him under Dr. Jack Wolfson, DO, Facebook, Instagram, on all the socials. Go check him out. His page is wonderful. And if you found this podcast helpful, please share it with somebody else. Don't forget to subscribe. And thanks for joining us today. May God bless you.